One, and we are live. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another network session with Core Code. I am Sofia. If you are coming back to our sessions, well, welcome back. We're super happy to have you. And if you are new here, we're also super excited to see you. And we want to tell you a little bit more about Core Code in case you don't know us. Core Code is a technology learning accelerator, and we accelerate learning of technology through boot camps for software engineers. We also have talent placement, and we also do upskilling programs inside of technology companies. And we also have these network sessions, of course, because we believe a lot in community and in learning together and in sharing experiences. And that's why we're here today. So that is just a little bit about who we are. And now I am super, super pleased to have today this very special session. But before we go into our very special guest, I want to give the mic along to our facilitators of the day or night, wherever you are. So Juan Luis, welcome. Juan Luis and Juan Rauh, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Sofia.
Welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I've been, part of Core Code in certain activities, and as always, I'm very thrilled. They make very good programs and do excellent work. For you to know a little bit about myself, I'm an entrepreneur. I created a company called Contract Flows that facilitates the writing process of contracts. And I'm also involved in a social project here in Guatemala and doing work for the COVID, the pandemic, and always looking forward to know more about machine learning. That's one of my hobbies and passions, right? So thank you for having me again, and I'll pass the mic to Juan.
Thanks, Juan Luis. And thanks, Core Code and Sophie, for having me here. So I'm Juan Rauh. I'm a computer scientist currently working at a startup as a data scientist, where we give microloans to people who are mostly not accepted by the traditional financial system. And I work a lot with machine learning and data. And I've been working there for a couple of years now. And as Juan said, also one of my passions is machine learning, AI, of that good stuff. And yeah, I'm very happy to introduce our special guest today, Maribeth.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and I'll say a bit more about myself in my presentation. But yeah, I'm here from London, and once we got the time zones sorted, yeah, everything is really exciting, and I can't wait to share more. Hopefully, it will be interesting.
Awesome. Thank you, Maribeth. So how we do this is that Maribeth is gonna start to share her presentation, which is sneak peek, but it's super, super cool. And then we're gonna be joining her in a while, so we can check both the questions that the facilitators might have, or also the questions that you, the audience, might have. So feel free to write any question or comment below, or maybe on the side. So I'm not so sure where your comment box is. But yeah, we'll be seeing you soon, Maribeth, and I'm gonna start sharing your screen so you can start your presentation, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Sophia. Okay. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my own career trajectory, and hopefully there are a few things there that maybe will be helpful for you all. But first, let me give a proper introduction. So I'm currently working as a research engineer at DeepMind. And to break that down a bit, DeepMind is a company that functions really more like a research institution, and all of their research is dedicated to artificial intelligence. And specifically, they want to build a machine learning system that has what they call general intelligence, so something like human intelligence. Today, machine learning is very good, even superhuman, at very specific tasks. But DeepMind is researching towards building a kind of a more unified system that has this very general and flexible intelligence. And their hope is to use that to advance science and to bring all kinds of other benefits. And you might have heard of DeepMind from their AlphaGo program, which was the first to beat a human at the board game of Go, which was considered a landmark. And more recently, predicting how proteins in the human that have been sequenced from the human proteome would fold, which is really fundamental for all kinds of downstream biological research. And as a bit of context that'll be relevant later, DeepMind functions pretty independently, but is currently owned by Google. And what do I do there? I'm a research engineer. So if you think of a spectrum from software engineering to a research scientist, research engineering is right in the middle, which means that I do a lot of programming and I'll be writing software to help do this research because machine learning is implemented in code. But I also get to contribute to the insights and ideas and direction of research. I can run my own experiments and say, I think that this is promising, or I found something interesting here. So I kind of get the best of both worlds, in my opinion. And what I'm really passionate about, stepping back for a minute, is the intersection of technology and society right here and right now. So DeepMind has a very long-term mission. This kind of general intelligence they want to build is, a very big, grand ambition and something that they're working towards. And I think there's big implications for that for humanity, of course, but also there's a lot of implications for humanity right now with the technology we have. Software engineering requires abstraction. For example, if you want to know if a user liked a news article, if they click on it, that's the abstraction. We think, okay, they clicked, they must have been interested. But the real world is a little bit messier. And as I think we've seen over the last few years, when a billion people use a product, sometimes there's unintended consequences. There's side effects and impacts that we couldn't have foreseen, positive and negative. And that's true even when a billion people don't use your product. Even if 10 do, there's probably some things you didn't expect. And that comes from this intersection from the technology you built and then the way people really use it, or the contexts in which it's used and out in the world. So in the last few years, as this kind of cartoon graph makes the point, machine learning fairness is a research area that has taken off, because machine learning in particular is what's been successful in the last 10 years is that models are trained on a whole bunch of data that's collected from the real world. And that's the human world, but it's all that the model knows. And it means that any associations that are in there, the model will pick up on. And when you collect data from the real world, it has a lot of the things you find in the real world, like all kinds of, in negative cases, it might have racist tendencies, or it might have sexist tendencies, or it might have kind of other correlations that are not central to the problem that you're trying to solve, but it's still there in the data because it's hard to filter those things out, because our world is complex and our data, data cleaning is a really hard thing. And machine learning fairness goes far beyond this, but that's the basic intuition, that machine learning models can learn some of our societal and cultural norms, whether or not we want them to. So this is what I'm really passionate about. And as it turns out, right now, I am in fact working on fairness in language modeling. So I'm working really right at the heart of what I'm most excited by at this amazing AI research lab that is supporting that work, which is really cool. To give a bit of background in language modeling, it's really a quite simple intuition. You can see here that really what it does is learn to predict the next word. So you just train it on tons and tons of text. And when you run the model, you can give it some text and it will just start generating words afterwards, or it can generate from nothing. And it sounds quite simple, but this advances in this area in the last just couple of years have been huge. And if you've heard of OpenAI's GPT-3 or more recently, Google announced a chatbot called Lambda. These are language models. All they do is predict the next word, but they can write convincing articles, they can power chatbots. It's a very, very powerful technology and quite new. It's just beginning to kind of filter out into products and applications. So what is fairness in language modeling? These are some snippets from some papers. There's all kinds of things that the model can learn. So these models are typically trained on text from the internet. And we all know that the internet has, there's all kinds of things written on the internet that maybe you wouldn't want your model that you're going to deploy in your product to be repeating. So, there's things that are outright toxic or hateful or violent. But there's also these kind of stereotypical associations, for example, that it might be making. Does it more often use male pronouns when talking about doctors than female pronouns in places, or does it reinforce some of these stereotypes that maybe we don't want to reinforce? And there's always the higher level questions of, well, what is fair? And that's where what I think is a really interesting question, but it is a really, really hard one that this field also faces. And to be honest, that is an ongoing discussion. There aren't clear-cut answers. So I often get asked, how can I get there too? People, when they hear that I work at DeepMind or that I work at Google, or that I'm working at a job in machine learning, that I'm on the thing that's what I'm the most passionate about, like how can I do that? How can I get a job at DeepMind? And unfortunately, I'm not sure that exactly how I got here is something that can be replicated by everyone. I don't have easy answers, but my hope with the rest of this talk is that maybe by outlining my trajectory, there will be some recipes, I guess, or insights that might be helpful for other people. And also I want to show that even though I'm working at one of the best AI labs in the world and doing the thing that I'm the most excited about, I got here by a series of small steps that individually are, hopefully breaking that down will help make it clear that anyone who's kind of doing something they love or, achieving what they aspire to some degree, it's always a series of small steps. So maybe seeing things through that lens will help you envision what series of steps might look like for you to get where, you aspire to be. So it's 2021, and actually just at the beginning of this year, I started this fairness research. So it's been less than a year that I've been working kind of in what I've called the dream job within the dream job, because there's lots of things happening at DeepMind that are not at this intersection of technology and society. So how did I come to be doing fairness research? Well, at the beginning of 2021, I actually just switched teams internally, which is, much easier to do than applying from the outside, because I had started working at DeepMind actually in 2018 on a team doing applied machine learning. And since DeepMind is owned by Google, this team was basically doing technology transfer. So DeepMind does research primarily. They publish papers. And since DeepMind is owned by Google, some of this research is really beneficial to Google products. And I worked on the team that looked for those matches of where research would help a product, and then actually apply the technology, which is always, speaking of the real world being messier, what's written in a research paper often requires a lot of work to get it working in a product or in a piece of software. So essentially, I just changed teams inside the same company because I've been telling people that I was interested in fairness since I joined. So when this research started, because it's fairly new, people had me in mind and I was able to make that team change. But how did I get a job at DeepMind? Because at some point I did have to interview. Well, actually, I was already working at Google. And as I said, DeepMind was acquired by Google. And even though I had to do an interview process, this applied team is working with Google products. And so me being a software engineer at Google meant I had specific skills that were really useful for that team. And I do think that this helped me get the job a lot, because actually I don't have a background in machine learning formally. I haven't studied it. And I had done some in my job at Google, but I think that my Google software engineering skills were a big part of how I got this job. So again, I was well positioned to be able to make this jump to DeepMind from Google, especially because there was this applied team that really needed my specific skill set. But getting a job at Google is not trivial. But if you have an internship at Google, it's a lot easier. Anytime you intern somewhere, it's much easier to get a full-time role afterwards. The interviews for internships are typically easier. So I did a conversion from my internship to Google. And so you can see already how I've kind of bit by bit worked my way into this position. But, even an internship at Google is something to be pretty excited about. So continuing backwards, I had an internship in my second to last summer of college at an IT company in the United States. It's a really fantastic company, but it's a company that happened to recruit at my university, and I, interviewed and got a position. I wanted to make sure I was writing code so that I would be prepared for an internship at a big tech company or a Silicon Valley tech company. But this was a company that happened to recruit at my university. And I do think that this coding experience and professional experience definitely laid foundations for my Google internship. And I'll also say here that part of landing my Google internship was doing a lot of just Googling and looking at intern posting after intern posting at Silicon Valley tech companies and seeing, what do they say that you need to know in their requirements? And you shouldn't treat those as a checklist where you need to have all of them, but it helped me figure out what are the really critical things I need to make sure that come up over and over again that I should brush up on. And I spent a lot of time preparing for those interviews because I was dead set on interning kind of generally at a Silicon Valley tech company, and I ended up at Google. So that's not in this little step backwards, but that was a kind of also a lot of work that went into making that leap from this internship to the Google one. But even this one, I was studying computer science. It makes sense that I got a programming internship. And I had an internship my first summer of college as well, which at this stage of my career, it was helpful just to have anything on my resume. This company does the animation for sports broadcasting. I was not doing anything programming related. I didn't even know how to program at the time, but it was this small nudge of, okay, I have a little bit of professional experience. I learn a little bit of coding. I get a coding internship, and you can see how these things all fit together. So each of these steps was small in hindsight. It was a conversion of an internship and, a switching teams and kind of being in the right place at the right time a bit. But I hope that in breaking that down, it makes it clearer what a trajectory can look like and what kind of the key steps can be. Not that I think that this is the only way or the best way, but hopefully it's an illustration. So now what I want to do is talk about, how did I know what steps to take? Because sometimes the hard thing in your career is, well, how did you know that you were so passionate about fairness research? Maybe, not everyone knows what they're really passionate about. Or, what if I hadn't been working at DeepMind when this research line started up there? Maybe I wouldn't be working on what I love. How do you be in the right place at the right time? I don't think it's just luck. I think you can kind of create opportunities. And so now I want to talk about what some of those kind of recipes are, and hopefully there's something in there that is useful. So one way of thinking about my career is through this, through the guidance of what I'm calling North Stars. And it really is just this that I've said before of what are you really passionate about? And it's a bit cliched. So maybe another way of thinking about it is, why do you work? What is it that you really want from your job? maybe actually there are things outside of work that you love the most, and you want a job that, pays well enough and is stable and is, has good coworkers. And that's fine. Actually, you don't have to have your career be the number one thing in your life. If you feel like, well, actually, I do think work is important to me, what have you found that makes you really light up? Again, actually, regardless of job, do you really love having conversations with people, or do you really love, quantum mechanics, and whenever it comes up in a conversation, you really want to get into it, even if you're not an expert? And just letting yourself kind of brainstorm and think really broadly. What is it that I love? What makes me light up? And then you can work back again to, well, where do those things come up in a career? Just because you love quantum physics doesn't mean that you should go, back to school, get a PhD, and try and, there's other ways to bring that into your career potentially. And it requires some creativity to think about. But I think starting with what really guides my career? What are kind of the deeper underlying things that I know will kind of make the time that I spend working satisfying and interesting or worthwhile? And I want to emphasize that this is what leads you to a job you love, not necessarily your dream job, because I think dream jobs are like soulmates. I'm not a romantic. I don't think they exist. I think there's many jobs that you'll really love, and it changes over time. So I said on purpose at the beginning of this presentation that I have my current dream job, not the one that I'll have forever, because actually, in a few years, I already have in the back of my head some other things that I want to do that even what I'm doing now is a stepping stone towards. So I think, North Stars also are worth reflecting on. Maybe they do shift a bit. So other examples of this in my career was actually my choice to study computer science. I didn't know what it was when I went to college, but when I found out, I still wasn't 100% sure that's what I wanted to study. But I understood that programming was a really broadly useful thing. So even if I ended up not liking programming, I knew that it would be interesting enough, the problem-solving aspect, that I would be okay with studying it. And then I could get a job in a field or at a company that's doing other things I think are interesting. So I would be kind of close to, or maybe even find a way to apply code to whatever other thing I ended up being interested in. So I left open this possibility of intersection with my other interests, because one of my North Stars is that I don't have just one interest. I'm interested in a lot of things. And this intersection of society and technology is definitely a North Star for me too. And there's many ways to work at this intersection. The role I'm in right now is one of them, but there are other ones too. And this comes from an even deeper North Star for me of just being passionate about people. And I think that thinking about how technology impacts people on the street today and how it shapes society is, I get to think about people. I get to think about what people's experience of technology is, not just kind of the nuts and bolts. So you have an idea of what you're interested in. Maybe you already did. That maybe is the easier part. How do you get there? How do you kind of be in the right place at the right time? Well, or maybe more, just what other kind of like are the reasonable and realistic steps that you can take in whatever direction you want to go? So I want to emphasize again that I actually kind of love looking at the trajectories of people who are really accomplished or who I really admire where they are, because even though professional bios don't always make it clear, if you ever have a chance to really sit down with the person and ask kind of some of the details, you'll find it's so many small things that accumulate up to that thing that you look at the end and go, wow, I can't believe they did that, or I can't believe they work there. Even Olympic athletes, you can find, or politicians who, the president of the United States, they all have these trajectories that are made of so many small things. And I find this really encouraging and exciting because it means that it's a possibility for all of us to move towards the things that we really want to achieve and the things that we aspire to. So there's obvious stepping stones like a degree or an internship, and clearly for me, those played a role. But there's also a lot of small ones, or ones that look adjacent to the obvious direction you're going. So for example, I had that first internship that was irrelevant from a skills perspective, but it did put professional experience on my resume, which counts for a lot at that point in your career. Another one was that I joined DeepMind's applied team at first. I wanted to learn more about machine learning, so it was a good direct fit there. But when I joined the team, I knew that DeepMind had another team called Ethics and Society, and that part of DeepMind's mission statement was that they wanted to really benefit the world with what they're building. And so I thought the reason I chose that job over some other job offers I had is because I could learn machine learning at any of those jobs, but DeepMind seemed to be working at that intersection or have some people who are thinking about it. And so even though I wasn't joining that team, maybe I could get coffee with them in the office. Maybe I could join the team in a few years. Maybe I could at least follow along with what the team was doing from the inside and see if it was actually what I was interested in. Maybe it wouldn't be, and then I would know. So that proximity to what I was interested in was actually a really important stepping stone. And actually, I am friends with some of the people on that team now, and I do follow the work that they're doing with a lot of interest, and it's been really valuable. Another thing that I did was asking to work on machine learning when I started at Google. My manager said, okay, you're new to the team. We have these different pieces of work. What interests you? And one of them, he kind of alluded to machine learning. And I said, well, I don't really know anything about machine learning, but I kind of knew in the back of my head that it was, very much a growing area. And so even again, if I didn't like it, it would still be great from like a job opportunities perspective. And again, I knew that I had a wide variety of interests beyond those that are purely technical. And machine learning is one of those parts of computer science where day to day, it's very mathematical, it's very technical, but it raises a lot of questions in the extreme about intelligence, consciousness, some of these philosophical topics I get really excited about. And so I thought, for me, even if my day-to-day is, the kind of the statistics and the programming that go into machine learning, sometimes you get to ponder those questions, or sometimes you'll talk about them with your coworkers over lunch. And for me, that adds a lot of color to my work and my enjoyment of it. So I asked to work on it because I knew it would, again, bring in some of my other interests. It turns out that I also like machine learning itself. So another way to move in the direction that you want to go is something that I call pulling threads. And I imagine one of those like balls of yarn where like a thread comes out of the middle and you pull it and you keep pulling it, and it kind of unravels from the middle. And I think even outside of career and life, there are these threads. Sometimes you see a little thread dangling somewhere and you pull. This is all an analogy. And it doesn't move. Or sometimes you pull and then you're like, wow, there's, and it opens a kind of a series of opportunities or a series of like great encounters. And so these threads are opportunities. And sometimes these are often things that don't look, there's not an obvious opportunity at face value. So let me make this concrete. When I moved to London, I didn't know anyone. Well, I knew like one person. And I had this interest in AI and ethics. And there was a tech community kind of that's focused on tech and politics intersection. And they were having a lecture series in their community space about AI and politics. And I thought, well, might as well go. Who knows who I'll meet there? Maybe I'll get involved in this community. And actually, I only went to 2 of these lecture series and I haven't become part of that community. But in those two sessions I went to, I met some people who I clicked with, and we had some interesting conversations. We had some shared interests in this realm of AI ethics, and we're coming from different disciplines. Some from like philosophy and economics, and me from software engineering. And we said, like, let's grab coffee. Let's talk about this more. So, like, I want to learn more about economics. They wanted to learn more about AI. And so I took them up on the offer. And one of these people I ended up co-founding an AI ethics discussion group with, where we tried to bring people from different disciplines together to have really intimate, honest conversations about really difficult and controversial topics in AI ethics. And, chatting with this person at the event wasn't, in that moment, an obvious opportunity. And I wasn't even trying to found a community myself or to have this discussion group, but it grew organically out of our interaction because I was open to it, because I was sharing what I was excited about and willing to help someone else learn and learn from them. And it ended up being a really amazing thing. Also, I think that these polling threads come up in communities often, come up with people. And sometimes even when you're not trying. But this kind of like openness and putting yourself out there, sharing, what you're excited about can go a long way. A critical piece, in my opinion, of how I got this role at DeepMind also is that I was giving a little short talk at a recruitment event at Google. And that was happening on campus when I worked there. And one of the other people presenting at this recruiting event worked at DeepMind. And as we were leaving, I just asked them really quickly, like, I had just heard about DeepMind the last few months. And I was like, I'm curious, like, what is it like to work at DeepMind? And they were like, well, why don't we get coffee sometime? I have to run now, but we'll chat about it. And this person, after we chatted, was like, actually, I guess I had mentioned that I was, wanting to work more in machine learning and was thinking about changing teams. And they're like, well, I think you'd be a great fit at DeepMind. I'd be willing to write you a recommendation if you want. And I was, very surprised and very grateful. And they've actually continued to be a mentor since then. So those little moments of, I'm just going to ask, or I'm just going to show up to this meeting and, see if there's a spark with someone when we chat, is a big part of where these threads come from. Or even just discovering what's possible and kind of learning the lay of the land can help a lot. When I was in college, there was a major explosion of hackathons on college campuses. And you would go and see thousands of computer science students from all over the country come together and build incredible stuff. And also a lot of companies come and recruit at the events. And by going there, I picked up a little bit of this culture of just, diving into a problem and hacking something together and, working with whoever showed up there and sharing what you've learned. And the engineers from the companies who would come to recruit would actually sometimes sit down and help the college students if they were using that company's API or something. And all of this helped me understand a little bit of the culture of Silicon Valley and realize what kind of opportunities existed for someone who wanted to work in tech. So it really broadened my horizons. So there's many forms that this kind of polling threads can take, but I found that often it involves communities and people and sharing what you're interested in a really genuine way, not with this kind of seeking opportunity, but seeking connection. And then many good things come from that. Many of these people I've mentioned are actually my friends as well. So those are kind of the recipes. Hopefully there's something here that is insightful for you. And I will leave it there. I hope the slides will be shared later. Otherwise, maybe you can go back and look at this in depth. But these kind of are the questions that I would put under each of these to help clarify, like, what does it mean to have a North Star? What kinds of things are stepping stones? And how do you pull threads? In particular for pulling threads, something I didn't mention earlier is also thinking about where is the field moving, or where is the center of action? Me wanting to intern in Silicon Valley for one summer was was me doing that, of saying, I just want to, seems like something's going on there. I want to just go intern and kind of see what it's all about. So I hope this has been helpful and interesting, and that you have some ideas of what your stepping stones might be. So thank you.
Thank you, Maribeth. I'm gonna stop sharing your screen so we can have a wrap up of your presentation. I'm gonna pass the mic to Juan.
Thanks a lot for the presentation, Maribeth. I think it was super insightful. Like, as you mentioned, we sometimes look at people that are very successful or like have done great feats, and we don't think about like all of the steps that it took them to get there, right? I was thinking about how, I guess, as a software engineer, you sometimes do that in your work, right? Look at a really big problem and try to like split it up into really small steps to get to the solution. But we don't think about like our life choices or like our career paths in that way. So I really loved it. Thank you for that. Now, I'd like to start with one question that I think it's pretty relevant, especially since we're doing this from different parts of the world. How do you think the remote work and like being able to connect with people online has changed how you approach either your North Stars, the small steps, or the pulling of threads?
That's a really good question. I definitely have found the remote aspect challenging, because I think for me, the human interaction is a big part of it, and it I find that hard to do digitally. I do think that one thing that's really beneficial is that you have much more access than you used to in the way that things have shifted since COVID. Like, so many communities and events and courses and conferences are all online. And so I think the human connection part, like this, the human connection part is still challenging. I'm not sure I have a lot of great suggestions there, but it's pretty staggering, the scope of things that are now like globally accessible for learning. So maybe that's a new opportunity. And I think also for remote work, maybe there's an expansion of possibilities there of, if you don't want to relocate somewhere, or would just never have even considered working in a certain place, maybe expand the scope of things that you are going to apply to, and just ask if they'll let there be remote work.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I have a follow-up question on that, because you mentioned that you have an AI ethics community. My question is that if when COVID happened, you went remote, and if when you went remote, did you start accepting or like connecting with people from even more countries? Because from what I understood, the community you were in was live, and it was with like people who lived close by. Did that change in any sense when COVID happened?
Unfortunately, we didn't go online, and actually my co-founder and I both found that we didn't have the time to put towards it. So we paused it. We thought about doing kind of like, we would do it topic-based and kind of creating a curriculum and kind of open sourcing the model. But we would often meet in coffee shops and we really wanted to have an intimate conversation. So we weren't quite sure how to bring it online, unfortunately.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like all the serendipitous moments and having the actual coffee, it makes sense. It makes sense. And I'm going to add one question from the audience on that one, because they were asking already, what's your AI ethics groups? I love to join. So maybe this is an invitation to reconsider. Yeah.
I just met some people like 2 weeks ago, super randomly. A friend like organized a dinner, and there were some people there. And at the end of the dinner, I realized that I had met one of the women, and she had come to one of these groups, and we were all talking about maybe restarting it. So who knows? I'll keep you posted.
Definitely. We would all want to join. I don't know if there's any other question by the facilitators, or should we jump with the ones from the audience?
I think we can start with the audience. I don't know if you have something specific to follow up with, Juanro.
Well, let's jump right in.
Okay,
Great.
I'm gonna jump with the audience. Then I have a lot of questions, but okay, to include them. So there's a question from Cristobal Samayoa. He's asking, from where you are standing now, career-wise, what's a piece of advice you'd give to your freshman self?
That's a very good question. I think when I was a freshman, I was still learning to be a little more fearless. And so maybe what I'm talking about now, of like seeing the steps and believing it's possible if you start taking them, is something that as a freshman I really didn't know, and thankfully some people helped me see that. But that not being intimidated by what you don't know, but actually just leading with questions. And I don't know how to, it's a hard thing to internalize, but knowing that really people know so much less than you think that they do. and that, as a freshman, you know more, you aren't, the gap is not as big as you think it is. And for me, this is connected to that kind of fearlessness, and just start asking questions about the thing that seems giant and you could never take on.
Awesome.
Yes, I would like to follow something around that question. In my experience, I also found that my biggest problem, or I wouldn't say
Challenge.
problem, but challenge, is with yourself. Like you should always believe in yourself, and we have this capability of doing a lot of things, a lot of good, and I mean, one of the experience that I have learned from my life is that you don't lose anything about asking, right? I think asking is key for success, for getting to know people, and almost always, when you're only looking for advice, you'll get out with more, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know if you can tell us about an example specific for that.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I think one thing I would add is that I often find usually people are quite flattered if you're asking for their advice, or you're asking them questions of something they know about. People like to talk about what they know, and it's actually a way to connect with people sometimes, and much more often it will feel that way to someone, rather than them being like, who's this person? Why are they asking me this question? I don't know if I have a super specific example, but I will say that more than once in my performance reviews at work, I've had the feedback that I ask really thought-provoking questions and really catch things that other people weren't. And I always find this really funny, because I feel like I ask questions, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I need to but I'm just going to put myself out there and just ask this question. And often, people are like, oh yeah, actually, that's a really good question. And if not, then they kind of, give you the pointer and you can learn for next time. Just recently I got this feedback, and my whole career I've worked at the edge of what I know. So it's been funny to see.
I love it. And that relates a lot with I love the analogy that you mentioned about pulling the thread. Just pulling, there's going to be a lot of threads. You're just pulling, and then surprise, and then, unpleasant surprise, or not necessarily even surprises. I think that has a lot to do, right? We usually, or sometimes we don't put ourselves out there because we're afraid that the only thing that's going to happen is that the thread's not going to come. But what if it does, right? What if it does come? What if it does pull, or whatever, right? I love that. And I feel like usually we take that those words for granted. The thing of put yourself out there, it's something that you see all over, that quote, you see that all over the internet and all over life, but it's actually a thing, and we usually don't do it on our day-to-day lives when we talk, for example, about our career, about reaching out for someone on LinkedIn, for example, or asking for someone for a network session, for example. I think this is a great example of what it looks like to pull one of those threads. I was having a message a couple of minutes ago from a person that graduated from one of our programs, and he was like, how do you have a person from DeepMind like, how are you going to be speaking with a person from DeepMind? How is that possible? Like, that's just unimaginable. But then again, we just started having conversations. I spoke to I think it was Juanro. I spoke to Juanro, like, do you know any cool people? And he referred me to one of his friends, and his friend referred me to another one of his friends. And then that person happened to know you. And then we're here. And it was just by just knocking on the door, asking a question, and then we were allowed to be surprised. So I think this is a great example of how that looks like. We actually had that thread pooling with you, and I'm loving it. So I think that's super, super interesting.
On the other side of that, actually, it's a thread pulling for me as well to be here, because one thing I did that I think is a kind of thread pulling is, once you're in a position of you have learned something and you have some experience, sharing that with people is actually mutually beneficial. And so I would do recruitment for Google. So I would go back to my university, which is also a free trip. I would go back to my university and do recruiting and tell people, like, look, here's the strategy for the interview. Let me look at your resume. If I just give you a couple pieces of information, you're all very smart and motivated, you'll find your way in. And someone that I met when recruiting is the person who contacted me. They got a job at Google later. So I met them as an undergrad. They got a job at Google, and they contacted me saying, hi, I don't know if you remember me, but I, basically that was my introduction to this. And for me, yeah, I think it's mutually beneficial. And it's amazing how all the way through it's these small happenstances almost.
I love it. I have another question, but it's from a different topic. I don't know if any of you guys have another question for Maribeth right now.
I've got another one, but it's also from a different topic.
Okay, then I'm gonna jump in. Well, I'm actually gonna grab one from the audience because it's important. We have one from Kenneth Ross. Actually, Kenneth was the one who was impressed about us having a conversation, and I was like, but you can also speak to her. Like, you're gonna be there. Actually, Kenneth, hi. This is Kenneth. This is Maribeth. So I'm gonna read the question from Kenneth. He's saying, what would you recommend doing for those moments when you doubt the direction your career is going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've definitely had some pretty deep doubts at moments. I guess it depends what the doubt is about. If the doubt is like, I'm not sure how much I really like this, one question that can help is going back to, like, what do I feel like I excel at? Or like, what do I want from work in my life in general? Like, kind of hitting reset on the question maybe could help. Or if you're doubting it because, like, something specifically maybe in your job isn't great. I think people often overstay in their role. It's hard to leave a company. No one wants to interview. Or if the doubt is like, I don't know if I want to be a software engineer anymore. I think being open to that, like, careers are multiple decades, not being afraid to doubt. But I guess it depends what the level of the question is. And I guess a lot of that, like, kind of high level brainstorming of, like, being open to not being a software engineer, or, what do I want from my job? Should always be mixed with, like, being highly practical. Do I have certain financial goals? When could I change? If I decide, okay, actually, I don't want to be a software engineer anymore. I want to be a travel agent. This is something that, like, in my secret other life I would do. Okay, well, let me save up this much money and then have a plan to get there. Or if I think this is the thing about my job that I don't like, let me start talking to other people, and sometimes asking people to describe what their work environment is like. You realize, like, oh, that's really different than where I work. It could be really different. So I guess it depends where it comes from.
Great. Thank you, Maribeth. Thank you, Kenneth, for your question.
That's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. It was helpful for me. I'm already thinking. Now, Juanro, maybe we can jump with your question.
Sure. So a bunch of times I've met with friends who either, like, studied a different topic from, like, STEM or get a degree on something else, but they enjoy technology a lot and they don't have, like, a clear path to getting into a tech company. What sort of advice would you give them?
So you said they didn't study STEM, but they're interested in technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess the good news is that technology is everywhere. And so I think there's a lot of ways to work adjacent to it. So I guess if they want to end up in a technical role, I guess at some point there has to be some education. But if they want to like work in a tech company, but they'd be open to doing program management or sales or a million other roles, you know, Google hires everyone down to a massage therapist. So, you know, it depends like what your involvement, I guess, wants to be with the technology. And so maybe if you pair it with like, what is it? Is it the problem solving aspect, or is it more like this kind of being in the thick of something that's really changing our world today? And then using that to guide like, okay, what kind of organization could I get a role in that would allow me to do that? And if there is something of like, I really want to work close to the technology itself, even if I'm not an engineer, then what has worked well for me is saying, okay, given the skills I have today, how can I like get a toe in the door at a place where I will be given an opportunity to expand my skill set, or where I know that they support internal transfers, or, you know, like, can you envision it all a way to go from like, if I get my toe in, maybe it will somehow, I'll be able to acquire some of the skills to edge a little bit closer to what I want. Even if it's not at that company, maybe working there will give me a high level knowledge of how mobile apps work. And then I can get a job in another place and kind of like, you know, wiggle your way in sideways.
I love it. And I think that relates with, because from what I understood, when you joined Google, you were not necessarily explicitly interested in AI, right? Like you were at Google, like doing your own thing, and then it was like, oh, and this exists, and you're like, oh, it could be. So as you were inside a company, you got exposed to different types of roles, and that's where you started having the discussions, the conversations. And my question is, did you start learning like AI or machine learning as you were inside Google, or had you learned about AI during college?
So I took one course related to machine learning in college, which was actually a natural language processing course, which has come full circle now. I'm finally actually working in that domain. But it was, you know, like an elective course, and natural language processing is like a, you know, it's not like a foundational introduction to machine learning. So really, I learned most of what I knew on the job from this very generous manager. And people will give you these kind of chances, and I don't know why he let me learn on the job, because I didn't know what I was doing, but you will be given those opportunities. And I wanted to say,
great manager.
Sorry, I was just thinking about what we were just talking about, you know, for people who want to get work in tech but didn't study STEM, and to Kenneth's question, I think maybe another way of putting the pulling threads is do things that maximize your opportunities. So if you're actually not sure where you want to go, what would what would open the most doors? And an example of this is when I graduated college, I had an offer from a startup, you know, Silicon Valley, very ambitious, would have been given a lot of responsibilities, really exciting. And I had an offer from Google, and I kind of felt like I'd be a sellout if I went to Google, which maybe sounds a little bit crazy, but in Silicon Valley, it's like, oh, yeah, the big tech companies, everyone wants to work at like the up and coming startup. But I knew that if I went to Google to start my career, you can always go to a startup later. There's so many startups. Maybe you will miss the next, you know, Facebook or whatever. You might, but it would give me a really solid, broad set of engineering skills. And even though it feels kind of unfortunate, like having that name on your resume would open a lot of doors. And so I factor that into my decisions when I'm not 100% sure about where I'm going.
I love that. It reminds me of another analogy that one of my mentors gave to me. He said, like, start eating the small fishes that are easier to grab. So with those fishes, you can feed the next big fish. So you have a small fish, but that's the food that's going to be for your next fish. And then you're going to keep growing because you're going to be you're going to have more energy or more food for your next opportunity, right? As you were saying, like more experience or more stepping stones that will lead you to that place And I think that's an interesting point, because we usually, when we dream, we usually want to get there now. Like, okay, I want to work at Google. I'm gonna get that interview and I'm gonna get the job. But usually that's not how it works for most of us, right? We start taking opportunities. We start learning, and then maybe we realize at Google that there was another big thing we wanted to do, but that was part of the journey. And I find that fascinating. And in terms of journey, I had a question, because as you mentioned, like, you've been changing, like, I don't know if the word is changing, but you've been discovering some new things that you love or some new dreams that you want to have. My question is, have you had like a something constant in that journey? For example, I don't know, have you had a constant on something you excel at, and you were, since you were, I don't know, at school or at college, and you were like, I'm amazing at this, and you've continued doing this throughout your whole career, or has everything changed? Like, they're constant on your journey?
I don't know if there are. Maybe this is a lack of, maybe people outside of me would say that there were. I tend to feel like I've been quite underqualified for most of the roles I've gotten. And so it's hard to say that I feel like I've really excelled at anything other than maybe finding a way to not lose my job while not being fully qualified. Which maybe there is a skill in, of kind of, yeah, knowing how to operate when you really are out of your depth. But yeah, I think also if you took my life in 3-year chunks, if you told me where I would be at the end of the 3 years, for every 3-year chunk, I would be shocked.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride, but thank you for that. I have a last question, and then maybe you have last questions, and then we can almost wrap it up. I can't believe it's 1 hour already, but okay. My question would be, because you've mentioned a lot about introspection and asking yourself questions. My question is, like, for you, does this introspection exercise happen naturally, or do you like have, I don't know, a monthly meeting with yourself where you sit down and you're like, Maribeth, what do you want today? Or is it just something like you're at work and it's like, how does that happen for you?
I think that there are moments in your career where you need to like generate a lot of momentum and like really put in a lot of work to like make a move, or like leading up to making a move. And so usually it's during those periods that I'll think about, okay, what do I really want? Can I be concrete about it? And usually I'm like a very visual and overly organized person. And usually there's some like pros and cons lists and like drawing some diagrams, like, you know, trying to like put things down so they're not swirling around in my head. Because sometimes you write it down on paper and you're like, oh no, actually that's something that I want because other people talk about it, but I'm not actually interested. Or I write it down and I'm like, oh wow. And then I think there are times between the momentum when you can and should just like enjoy what you're doing, coast. Don't worry about, you don't have to like be driving yourself all the time. And you can ride that momentum once you've built it and kind of plateau, and then do another kind of, okay, it's time to start cranking the wheel.
I love that. Thank you, Maribeth. Juan Luis, we have a space for 2 more questions from you. So if you have a question, if not, that's fine. I can grab one from the audience.
Juan Luis, do you have anything?
Not right now. I better grab some from the audience.
Great. Okay. Well, actually, we have some questions about language processing, and I'm
happy to answer those. They look like interesting questions.
I know, but we have 1 minute. I'm trying to be selective.
Okay, I've got a question.
Okay, go on.
All right. So you've talked about like having North Stars and taking small steps, right? Sometimes the steps might be very small and you feel like your North Star is so far away from getting to that goal. How do you avoid getting discouraged?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's why I tried to say like, you'll find a job you love and not your dream job. which maybe is a bit discouraging. But I guess the hope is that because you're thinking about what really excites me, and you're trying to, like, even if you're not, an Olympic athlete yet, you still enjoy swimming, or like you're bringing in some of the things that you enjoy. Like if you're building a skill that's going to help you get where you want to go, hopefully it's because you enjoy that skill and find it interesting. And no job is perfect. I guess these are all quite negative responses to a question about not getting discouraged. But, when you work at Google or you work at DeepMind, you realize that every institution has its problems, and every job has its things that are really maddening and difficult and frustrating. And so, know that probably where you are now has a lot of good in it. And if it doesn't, like, what is the one step to bring in something that you enjoy? What's a working environment that energizes you? What's a skill that feels good to be building? What do you feel competent at? And I think in some sense, you can have a North Star you're always moving towards, and also always have like a really great job that you're excited about. Not always. There will always be bad jobs in a career, but yeah, it's less about working to get to a fixed point and more about guiding yourself so your whole career is actually relatively satisfying.
Great.
Thank
I
you.
feel like
Yeah,
I'm
that's great.
saying great to everything you're saying, but can't fly. Okay, so we're already on time. I know we have a couple more questions from the audience. I'm gonna be sending them to Maribeth, and maybe she can answer to them via email, and we can send them your answers. But now we have to wrap this up. Hopefully we'll have Maribeth sometime soon again. But there is a very last thing. I don't know if you guys have a couple more minutes, so I can do the wrap up of this. Is it okay? Okay, cool. So we usually have a pop quiz for our guests and our facilitators. Yeah, get ready. So the pop quiz is basically, if this would be the only webinar left that you had, like this is the last webinar you're gonna give, what would you say to the audience? It can be something about life. It can be something about career. It can be anything you want. So just one idea, last idea that you would share with your last audience. It's a bit deep. Anyone can grab the mic.
Who wants to start?
You can start. You grab the mic.
All right. Well, the first, what I would say is, I think it's very aligned with what Maribeth last said. Focus on the direction and not on where you want to be. And to remember to take on responsibility, because that's where opportunities are, right?
Thank you, Juan Luis. Who comes next?
I think what I would say is the most important thing that you'll ever do is, and I don't like making kind of extreme statements, superlative statements. I really do think one of the most important things you'll ever do is get to know yourself and like work through the things that are difficult for you, and like learn how to take care of yourself, because that really does. That's been also a backdrop to a lot of like the last few years of my career happening outside of work. And I think that it unlocks so much in every part of your life. And so if you have the capacity to, learn to take care of yourself and learn to really confront the things that like maybe aren't ideal. Like I'm thinking in terms of like mental health and like really like deep personal stuff. If you have the ability and the capacity to work through those things, I think that's the most important work you'll ever do, because it's the ripple effects are massive.
Yeah, and I guess adding a little bit onto that, I'd like to say that I think we should all learn to enjoy the ride. Sometimes we might not be in like the best place that we want to be, or like everything seems a bit hard, and there's always positive things about the situation that you might find yourself in, and there's always going to be ups and downs, and but all of them are very interesting. So learn to enjoy it.
Thank you. Beautiful wrap up. You all passed the test. Thank you. That was amazing. So okay, we're wrapping this up. Thank you everybody. Thank you Maribeth. Thank you Juan Luis. Thank you Juanro for being here. This was super powerful, and I'm sure we've all learned a lot. It was really inspiring. So let's remember to keep pulling on those threads, enjoying the ride, and putting some toes in the doors. So okay everybody, we'll be seeing you soon.